Senators, Donald Trump spent months inciting his base to believe that their election was stolen. And that was the point, that was the thing that would get people so angry. Think about that. What it would take to get a large group of thousands of Americans so angry to storm the Capitol. That was the purpose behind Donald Trump saying that the election had been rigged and that the election had been stolen. And to be clear, when he says the election is stolen, what he's saying is that the victory, and he even says one time, the election victory is being stolen from them. Think about how significant that is to Americans. Again, you're right, over 70 million, I think 74 million people voted for Donald Trump. And this wasn't a one-off comment. It wasn't one time. It was over and over and over and over and over again with a purpose. And we're not having this impeachment trial here because Donald Trump contested the election. As I said during the presentation, nobody here wants to lose an election. We all run our races to win our elections. But what President Trump did was different. What our commander-in-chief did was the polar opposite of what we're supposed to do. We let the people decide the elections, except President Trump. He directed all of that rage that he had incited to January 6th, the last chance. This again, to him, this was his last chance. This was certifying the election results. He needed to whip up that mob, amp them up enough to get out there and try to stop the election results, the certification of the election. And y'all, they took over the Senate chamber to do that. They almost took over the House chamber. There were 50 or so or more House members who were literally scared for their lives up in the gallery. A woman who bought into that big lie died because she believed the president's big lie. This resulted in a loss of one of his supporters' lives. A Capitol police officer died that day. Other of President Trump's supporters. 2 Capitol police officers ended up taking their own lives. Defense counsel, their defense is basically everything President Trump did is okay, and he could do it again. Is that what we believe? That there is no problem with that? That it's perfectly fine if he does the same thing all over again? This is dangerous. He's inciting his base. He was using the claim of a rigged election. We have never seen somebody do that over and over and over again, tell a lie, say 6 months ahead of time that it's a rigged election. There is a dangerous consequence to that. When you've got millions of followers on Twitter and millions of followers on Facebook, and you've got that huge bully pulpit from the White House, and you're the President of the United States, there is a cost to doing that. People are listening to you in a way that, quite honestly, they're not listening to me, and they're not listening to all of us in this room. You know, I just want to clear up, the defense counsel made a point about something that I read earlier. The defense counsel suggested I misspoke. And I just want to clarify for the record that the tweet I referenced, let me read you the tweet directly. If a Democrat presidential candidate had an election rigged and stolen with proof of such acts at a level never seen before, the Democrat senators would consider it an act of war and fight to the death. Mitch and the Republicans do nothing, just want to let it pass. No fight. So Donald Trump was equating what Democrats would do if their election was stolen. He said they'd fight to the death. Why do you think he sends that tweet? Because he's trying to say, hey, the other side would fight to the death, so you should fight to the death. I mean, do we read that any other way?
Mr. President, The senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, on my behalf and on behalf of Senator Kramer, I send a question to the desk.
Senator Hawley, on behalf of himself and Senator Kramer, send a question for the council and House manager. And following our procedure, the first one to respond will be, after it's read, will be the counsel for the former president.
If the Senate's power to disqualify is not derivative of the power to remove a convicted president from office, could the Senate disqualify a sitting president but not remove him or her? If the Senate's power to disqualify is not derivative of the power to remove a convicted president from office, could the Senate disqualify a sitting president but not remove him or her?
President has 2.5 minutes.
No. But I can't let this rest. Mr. Castro attributed a statement the time before last that he was up here that Donald Trump had told his people to fight to the death. I'm not from here. I'm not like you guys. I was being very polite and given an opportunity to correct the record, and I thought that's exactly what he would do. But instead, what he did is he came up and illustrated the problem with the presentation of the House case. It's been smoke and mirrors, and worse, it's been dishonest. He came up and tried to cover when he got caught, as they were caught earlier today with all of the evidence, checking tweets, switching dates, everything they did. And bear in mind, I had 2 days to look at their evidence. And when I say 2 days, I mean they started putting in their evidence, so I started to be able to get looking at it. That is not the way this should be done. But what we discovered was he knew what he was doing. He knew that the president didn't say that to his people. What he said was if it happened to the Dems, this is what they would do. In his speech that day, you know what he said? He said if this happened to the Democrats, if the election was stolen from the Democrats, all hell would break loose. But, he said to his supporters, we are smarter, we are stronger, and we're going to do what they did all summer long. So what he did was he misrepresented a tweet to you to put forth the narrative that is wrong. It's wrong, it's dishonest, and the American people don't deserve this any longer. You must acquit.
Managers on the part of the House of Representatives have 2.5 minutes.
And that was profoundly inaccurate and irrelevant to what the question is. So I'm going to get back to the question. So under Article 2, Section 4, a president who is in office must be convicted before removal. then must be removed before disqualification. Okay. But if the president is already out of office, then he can be separately disqualified, as this president is. But these powers have always been treated as separate, which is why I think there have been 8 people who've been convicted and removed, and just 3 of them disqualified. And as you know, there's a totally separate process within the Senate for doing this. The Constitution requires 2/3 vote for conviction, but for disqualification, it's a majority vote. It's a separate thing. So people could vote to convict and then vote not to disqualify. If they felt that the evidence demonstrated that the president was guilty of incitement to insurrection, they could vote to convict. But if they felt that they didn't want to exercise the further power established by the Constitution to disqualify, they wouldn't have to do that, and that could be something that's taken up separately by the Senate by majority vote.
Mr. President,
The senator from Massachusetts.
I send a question to the desk.
The senator from Massachusetts has a question for the House managers. The clerk will read the question.
The defense's presentation highlighted the fact that Democratic members of Congress raised objections to counting of electoral votes in past joint sessions of Congress. To your knowledge, were any of those Democratic objections raised after insurrectionists stormed the Capitol in order to prevent the counting of electoral votes, and after the president's personal lawyer asked senators to make these objections specifically to delay the certification?
So thank you very much, Mr. President, for the opportunity to respond to that. The answer is no. We are not aware that any other objections raised in the counting of electoral college votes, either by Democrats or Republicans, and this has actually been a kind of proud bipartisan tradition under the Electoral College, just because the Electoral College is so arcane and has so many rules to it. I think that my co-counsel on the other side had some fun, because I was one of the people who took, I think, about 30 seconds in 2016 to point out that the electors from Florida were not actually conforming to the letter of the law, because they have a rule in Florida that you can't be a dual office holder. In other words, you can't be like a state legislator and also be an elector. And so that was improper form. But I think that then Vice President Biden properly gavelled me down and said, look, we're going to try to make the Electoral College work, and we're going to vindicate the will of the people. And that's pretty much what's happened. And nobody has stormed the Capitol before, or, as Representative Cheney, the Secretary of the Republican Conference, said, gone out and summoned a mob, assembled a mob, incited a mob, and lit a match. As Representative Cheney said, that all of this goes to the doorstep of the president. None of it would have happened without him, and everything is due to his actions. This would not happen. That is the chair of the House Republican Conference, who was the target of an effort to remove her, which was rejected on a vote by more than 2-1 in the House Republican Conference, when there was an attempt to remove her for voting for impeachment and becoming a leader for vindicating our constitutional values. So please don't mix up what Republicans and Democrats have done, I think, in every election for a long time, to say there are improprieties going on in terms of conforming with state election laws, with the idea of mobilizing a mob insurrection against the government that got 5 people killed, 140 Capitol officers wounded, and threatened the actual peaceful succession of power and transfer of power in America. Now, if we want to talk about reforming the Electoral College, we can talk about reforming the Electoral College. You don't do it with violence.
Mr.
Senator from
President,
North Dakota.
thank you. My apologies to the Senator from Massachusetts for butting in. I send a question to the desk for the former president's attorneys.
The question from Senator Kramer is for the counsel for the former president. The clerk will read the question.
Given the allegations of the House manager that President Trump has tolerated anti-Semitic rhetoric, has there been a more pro-Israel president than President Trump?
No, but it's apparent that nobody listened to what I said earlier today because the victorial speech needs to stop. You need to stop. There was nothing fun here, Mr. Raskin. We aren't having fun here. This is about the most miserable experience I've had down here in Washington, D.C. There's nothing fun about it. And in Philadelphia, where I come from, when you get caught doctoring the evidence, your case is over. And that's what happened. They got caught doctoring the evidence, and this case should be over.
Senator from Vermont. The senator from Vermont, Senator Sanders, has a question for both the counsel for the former president and House manager. The clerk will read it, and following our procedure, the House managers will go first.
The House prosecutors have stated over and over again that President Trump was perpetrating a big lie when he repeatedly claimed that the election was stolen from him and that he actually won the election by a landslide. Are the prosecutors right when they claim that Trump was telling a big lie, or in your judgment, did Trump actually win the election?
The House managers have up to 2.5 minutes.
As we all know, President Trump did lose the election by 7 million votes, 306 electoral votes. By the time of the January 6 attack, the courts, the Justice Department, all 50 states across the country had done, agreed that the votes were counted, the people had spoken, and it was time for the peaceful transfer of power, as our Constitution and the rule of law demands. 61 courts. 61 courts the president went to. That's fine, appropriate. He lost. He lost. He lost the election. He lost the court case. As Leader McConnell recognized the day after the electors certified the votes on December 14th, he said, quote, "Many millions of us had hoped that the presidential election would yield a different result. But our system of government has processes to determine who will be sworn in on January 20th. The Electoral College has spoken." Patriotism. Sometimes there is a reason to dispute an election. Sometimes the count is close. Sometimes we ask for a recount, go to courts. All of that's appropriate. I lost my first election. I stayed in bed for 3 days. We do what we need to do, and we move on. This was not that. Because when all of these people confirmed that Donald Trump had lost, when the courts, his Department of Justice, state officials, Congress, his vice president were ready to commit to the peaceful transfer of power, Donald Trump was not ready. And so we are all here because he was not ready. Day after day, he told his supporters false, outlandish claims of why this election was rigged. Now, let's be clear. President Trump had absolutely no support of these claims, but that wasn't the point of what he was doing. He did it to make his supporters frustrated, to make them angry.
Time has expired. And counsel for the former president recognized for 2.5 minutes.
May I have the question read again and not have it count to my 2
Of course, the clerk will read the question again.
The House prosecutors have stated over and over again that President Trump was perpetrating a big lie when he repeatedly claimed that the election was stolen from him and that he actually won the election by a landslide. Are the prosecutors right when they claim that Trump was telling a big lie, or in your judgment, did Trump actually win the election?
The counsel for the former president have 2.5 minutes.
My judgment? Who asked that? I did. My judgment's irrelevant in this proceeding. It absolutely is. What's supposed to happen here is the article of impeachment is supposed to be...
The Senate will be in order.
Senators may not challenge
The senators, under the rules, cannot challenge the content of the response. The counsel will continue.
May I have the question read again, please?
The House prosecutors have stated over and over again that President Trump was perpetrating a big lie when he repeatedly claimed that the election was stolen from him and that he actually won the election by a landslide. Are the prosecutors right when they claim that Trump was telling a big lie, or in your judgment, did Trump actually win the election?
In my judgment, it's irrelevant to the question before this body. What's relevant in this impeachment article is, were Mr. Trump's words insightful to the point of violence and riot? That's the charge. That's the question. And the answer is no. He did not have speech that was insightful to violence or riot. Now, what's important to understand here is the House managers have completely, from the beginning of this case to right now, done everything except answer that question. The question they brought before you, the question they want my client to be punished by. That's the questions that should be getting asked. And the answer is, he advocated for peaceful, patriotic protests. They're his words. The House managers have showed zero evidence that his words did anything else. Remember, all of the evidence is this was premeditated. The attack on the Capitol was pre-planned. It didn't have anything to do with Mr. Trump in any way, what he said on that day on January 6th at that ellipse. And that's the issue before this Senate. Now, on the issue of contesting elections and the results, the Democrats have a long history of just doing that. I hope everybody was able to see the video earlier today. Over and over again, it's been contested. When Mr. Trump was elected president, we were told that he was hijacked.
Council's 2.5 minutes has expired. Oh, okay. The senator from Wisconsin. I'm sorry, I couldn't see who was.
Understand. I sent a question to the desk for both parties.